Happy December, everyone, and welcome to Marketing Live for Friday, December the 2nd, 2016. I'm your host, Rob Zinkin. I serve as Associate Vice President for Marketing at Indiana University, and designing the search experience is our focus today, and I'll introduce our guests shortly. But first, Marketing Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network, offering viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education and beyond. Live broadcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in our industry. All episodes of Marketing Live are free and accessible in the video archives at higheredlive.com and in podcast format on iTunes. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Thanks as well to Funnelback. Funnelback isn't just a search engine, it's a problem solver. Their team sees search as more than keywords and queries. Search is a powerful tool that can bring disparate data together in a transformative way. Learn how University College London brought order to content chaos and improved the search user experience with Funnelback. We'll be tweeting out a link in just a minute. Also, today's live viewing experience is powered by Maestro, the premier marketing tech platform for broadcasters. All right, let's meet our guests, and thanks everyone for your patience as it took a few minutes to get us started this afternoon, but very excited about today's discussion and today's guest, starting with Dr. Tony Russell Rose, founder and director of UX Labs, a research and design consultancy specializing in complex search and information access applications. Tony holds a PhD in artificial intelligence and a master's in cognitive psychology. He has published more than 70 scientific papers on search, user experience, and text analytics, and is co-author of Designing the Search Experience, the Information Architecture of Discovery. Tony, great to see you. Welcome to the episode.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here.
And thanks also to Will Noble for joining. He is part of the business development team for search technology at Funnelback, based in Seattle. He is based in Seattle. Before moving to the US, Will worked in the digital industry in London, also working for Funnelback. There he collaborated closely with institutions including the University of Oxford, the University of Cambridge, and others to develop search strategies resulting in increased conversions and the creation of seamless user journeys. So Will, thank you for joining, and nice to see you too.
Thanks, Rob. Nice to see you too.
Great. Well, to begin, I know we have lots to talk about with designing the search experience, but I've gone through a little bit of your official bios, but I'd love to give viewers an opportunity to go beyond those bios just a little bit. So I'll ask if you could share something from your career path, from your professional journey, whether that's a specific experience or anything noteworthy that perhaps has had a lasting impact on you and your career. So Tony, I will let you kick us off.
Well, I'd probably go right back to the start for that. There's been such a lot of formative influences on my career. As you probably know from my background, I'm quite multidisciplinary in that I'm interested in a whole bunch of subjects, all the way from user experience across to information science, information retrieval, across to linguistics and text analytics. And there's been lots of people who've shaped that influence. But I think one thing that has been a common thread throughout my career is that interest in the human element. And that stems actually from, I originally did an engineering degree, but I did it at Nottingham University in the UK. And that's one of the centres for human factors. And I still have a very fond regard in the certificates up on the wall just in front of me from my days back at Nottingham. So I think my professors there of human factors were the people who really sowed the seeds for so many things that I've been interested in and pursued since. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Tony. And how about Will? And welcome again to the US, by the way.
Thanks very much. It's an interesting question. I think it's probably going to have to be a person for me. It's actually one of my old colleagues over in London. I think he was an old manager of mine. He probably personified the lead by example management style, and so not that, just an inherent enthusiasm about the concepts, about what he does, but also that drive and interest in not just professional development but personal development. And he's a chap called Gordon Grace, and when we meet someone like that, it can be kind of infectious to actually a great sort of person for me personally, really helps me with my self-motivation. Probably one of the reasons why I'm at States talking to you now.
Excellent. Well, as we take a look at this topic in designing the search experience, and I'll go back to your comments, Tony, in terms of the human element, and I suppose that's probably the place where we should start. And starting with the user, as we should probably always do. And certainly there are individual differences in how people go about that. And I know that you state that the expertise of users varies on a couple of dimensions in terms of domain expertise and technical expertise. So if you could, maybe we could start there, and if you could dive into that a little bit in terms of those areas of 2 dimensions of expertise, and what you mean by that, why it's important.
Okay, so I think I'd probably wind back just a little bit beyond that and say I think it's important to understand that with search, and particularly search in professional context, you know, there's lots of different ways in which users vary. And so I think part of what I try to do is put a little bit of rigor around understanding the dimensions of that variation. And as you rightly point out, I think you know, if you study certainly the academic literature and you follow the best practice guidelines, I think it's important to recognise that 2 of those most important dimensions are the technical expertise and the domain expertise. And essentially, technical expertise means that, you know, how skilled and how comfortable people are with searching, and that can, you know, vary quite considerably in professional environments. And of course, domain expertise is what knowledge people have of the subject matter, which is kind of independent of that, because it influences their ability to analyze and make sense of what they found, and therefore formulate suitable, appropriate follow-on search strategies and follow-on queries. And there are recognized ways of measuring those 2 types of expertise. And you might find that, you know, in what you're trying to do with your search installation, you need to accommodate users across, you know, that may be high in search expertise and high in technical expertise, or low on both dimensions. And I think that's an important part of the research process when you're designing a search experience, is understanding where on that spectrum your users fall.
Great. And as we get an introduction to this topic and talk about the dimensions of search user experience, I want to talk about some of those other dimensions. Task and context and mode, and perhaps moving next to task. And I assume that's a similar sort of discussion, or at least starting point, as it is with users, that it varies with users, and the task also varies. It could be it could vary in scope, it could vary in complexity, in terms of what they want to accomplish.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is one of the things where, you know, in the search community we can and rightly do borrow a lot of thinking and concepts and principles from what we call the HCI, human computer interaction, or human factors community. And if you have worked in that community, you recognize that, you know, the 3 pillars of user-centered design are the user, the task, and the environment, which is like the who, the what, and the where. And moving on to the second one, which you've raised, is the task of what they're doing. And again, part of your research phase before you design or build a search experience is understanding the full range of the tasks that your users need to undertake. You know, you may have anecdotal evidence that they're doing certain things, but, you know, there's lots and lots of good practice about trying to discover in a more principled manner the range of tasks that users are doing. And as you rightly pointed out, they can range from, you know, very simple things like known item search, as it's called, finding a particular book or finding a particular part or a particular product, to a much more complex or abstract problem, of which search is just one element, but a very crucial element nonetheless. And then there's a whole spectrum of other tasks, search-related tasks in between. And again, part of the secret to good design is the research phase before you even start solutionizing, is understanding where on that spectrum of complexity of tasks your users are going to lie.
And then as we move on to some of those other dimensions, how about context? And I really appreciate how you state that search is a a conversation, and if you could elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah. So two things. I mean, let me just do the context one first. So for context, you know, again, that could be something relatively simple and transparent, like, you know, are they mobile or are they desk bound? What is their physical context? But there's also the organizational and social context as well. And then there's the context from, you know, an information assets point of view as well. What type of content are you trying to retrieve? So all those things are important. And overlaid on top of that is the dialogue element. You know, I do like to talk about and think about search as a dialogue, because most search tasks of any complexity are not resolved in a single query, in a single set of results. There is an iteration. And just like with human dialogues, there are certain rules that underpin successful dialogues and differentiate them from unsuccessful or dysfunctional dialogues. And a lot of the things about, you know, dealing with ambiguity and, you know, finding the specifics and clarifying a user's intent, exactly as we do in human dialogues, they also apply to search dialogues as well. And I use those ideas to kind of shape and guide the design interventions that I use in the work that I do.
Great. And in terms of then the modes of search and discovering, you know, I think, or at least myself, in some cases, you think of search and you may immediately just think of information retrieval. And you have framed that as a much more holistic experience, and with the distinct modes of search and discovering.
Yeah, so that's the bit that we added on. If you think of it as, when I say we, I'm referring to myself and a few academic colleagues. I still do, you know, some scholarly work, you know, amongst the consulting work that I do. And if you think about us as having borrowed or reused, you know, principles from the human factors community with the user, the task, and the context, you know, the who, the what, and the where. We've added another layer on top of that because we recognise that what we're doing is applying those principles in where it's a very information-rich environment, and people are problem-solving in information-rich environments. So we've kind of added an extra layer or extra dimension to that, which we think of as the how. How are they going about the search that they're doing? And that's the fourth dimension that we've added, where we've tried to find repeating patterns of search behavior. And we've done some empirical work and published it as a number of scholarly papers where we've identified modes of search behavior and given them labels, you know, things like locating, verifying, monitoring, evaluating, synthesizing, analyzing. These repeating patterns of behavior that we've found in across a number of engagements, and we've given them, you know, names and tried to uncover patterns of how they link together. And we use that also in our design work. Well, initially in the analysis work of understanding requirements, but then in a generative sense for generating design solutions.
Great. And is there an example? I'm trying to think of a way to bring those modes to life for viewers or listeners, or something that might come to mind in terms of laying out an example of how
Absolutely.
Okay.
Think about Twitter. What do? We monitor. Most of the time we have, you know, TweetDeck or some other client, and we monitor. And then something comes up, and we might want to verify who it is. We'll open up their profile, we'll verify who it is. And then we'll evaluate, do I want to follow this person? Do I want to, you know, pursue this tweet? Do I want to retweet this? And then we synthesize. You know, we follow up with our own tweet of our own. So even just if you look at this, a simple interaction with Twitter, you're seeing these modes, as we call, used across throughout the whole site. I mean, really, they're probably of greater value when you're designing complex, business-focused search applications like business intelligence, dashboards, and other, you know, complex search-based applications. But as a simple example, I think that most people relate to, you know, Twitter is a pretty good one.
Great. And of course, I'm eager to jump into some of the design implications and how we could go about applying some of these insights, and of course how the work that Will has done specifically with some institutions. But and I know this is a complex topic and there's a lot there, but is there any other baseline information before we do jump into some of the design implications that might be useful to touch on?
Well, those 4 dimensions on their own, you know, I don't know if I should really kind of segue straight into the book, but those 4 dimensions on their own that we just described, they're all like PhD topics in their own right. They're all career things in their own right. You know, understanding users is you know, right, the discipline of many you know, psychology oriented professions. Understanding tasks, that's kind of what business analysts do, and you know, understanding context again is a huge topic in its own right. So I think each one of those, it's more about really the depth, I guess, how far you take each one, and then understanding how they fit together, I think, is the other piece, because there's subtle interactions between them, which mean that, you know, you can't just assume that if you take one set of data from one dimension, another set of data from another, you just put them together and everything will be fine. You know, there are lots of complications in design, trade-offs and subtleties that you need to take into account. If I just say just one other thing, I think also with design and search design, it's a bit like chess, if this isn't too much of a cliche, in as much as I think you can understand the rules very rapidly, but understanding how and when to apply them, you know, takes years of practice. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why we wrote the book, is to try and distill that down into something that we could share.
I mean, I think all of this stuff is, it's really interesting. It's what you've discussed about, maybe for people listening, to put some applicable stuff to this. When you say understanding the reason behind why someone's searching. If you're in a higher education institution, you don't particularly have the time. And even what we discussed, just drawing out some broad scenarios of what people, what their background might be, what their user scenario is, what they might be searching for, and then you can actually generate those tasks, those search tasks, and what they're trying to look for. And those broad user personas can be a really good way to use, just to understand the context of those queries, and then that can actually really drive what kind of relevant search features and what's going to be applicable. We're going to discuss in a second.
Great, and just a reminder for viewers, feel free to jump into the conversation if you have a question for Tony or for Will. Please tweet us using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. Okay, so some of these design implications, then where do we even begin with applying some of these insights?
Oh, that's quite a tough one to answer, because that's a very visual thing. I'm not quite sure how much I should talk about the book, but I don't know. As an example, there are lots of good search books out there, I should point out. There's at least half a dozen that, you know, and we've stood on the shoulder of giants in what we've done. It's hard really for me to answer that question, I guess, without talking about a specific scenario. I could talk about some of the disciplines involved. I think one thing, depending on the project involved, I think one thing to bear in mind is that you know, not all design is the same. I think it's very easy to kind of you know, to think that design is all about the colouring in bit, you know, the visceral, the appearance. And I think one of the things that more mature organisations now start to recognise is that design is a very, very multidisciplinary thing, and that most of the best search applications that I've worked with have recognised that, and have recognised that the skills in building the right information architecture are not the same as the skills in building the right interaction design, and they're not the same skills or people as doing the right visual design. And then there's another layer on top of that. If you're doing a complex faceted search installation, understanding how to deploy the right facets and where and how they should be executed, from you know, what widgetry you use and how they relate to each other. And there's lots of nuances around faceted search that are almost what I would say the job of a business analyst to get right, not a designer at all. So I'm not sure if I really answered your question there, but I don't know if Is that the sort of thing that you were thinking about?
Yeah, and don't be shy with the book, by all means.
Okay.
Ample opportunity. Well, again, as a someone who's not into this discipline on a regular basis, some of the things that I found fascinating or were eye-opening for me is just the realization of all the different forms that search results can take. And so some of the implications from that standpoint I thought were at least thought-provoking from my standpoint. So I know you can get into a lot of different areas, but just again from sort of a beginner perspective, that was helpful for me.
Yeah. Well, should I just make one very practical comment there? Because I talked a lot of what maybe at a more abstract level, but for the search results page, just one example of the sort of things that make the design challenge difficult is the search results page has to do two jobs, and they're both in conflict. The first job it has to do is express to the user where they are in the information landscape. So it needs to give you a sense of an overview of, okay, I've landed in somewhere in this information landscape. What kind of stuff is here? The first page of search results has to do that job. Especially if you've given an ambiguous query, it needs to give a sense of all the different interpretations of that query. But at the same time, the user needs to make relevance judgments. And to make relevance judgments, you need to have lots and lots of detail. So to do the first job properly, to give you that landscape, you need to make the results as small as possible and pack as many as possible on the page. But to do the second job properly, it's the opposite. You want to make the search results as big as possible. And it doesn't really matter how many you have on the page, because you'd make ideally each result, the whole document, and then you can make a complete relevance judgment. So that sort of thing, it's just one of the kind of tensions that is in the design of getting a search experience right, where you have to get the right balance between opposing forces. So does that give you a little concrete example of some of the more abstract things that I've talked about? Yeah,
it does. And Will, you were going to jump in as well?
Oh, well, yeah, I was going to ask Tony a question. When you mentioned about the specific filtering, we've seen in the past is that sort of search filtering, when you said it's going to be the job of a business analyst to define what those filters are. We've seen it actually sort of been institutionally led, so there'll be some sort of ways to filter information that it's of no use to the actual end user at all, and based on a management or a company structure. That people maybe not have any idea. So you're trying to navigate people to these silos of information, but they don't know what these areas might even associate with.
Yeah, that's right. Just to clarify my point, I don't think it's a business analyst's job necessarily to specify the requirements, but to interpret them and to execute them in such a way as they can hand off then to the designer to produce, to execute. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've seen so many faceted search implementations that are let's just say suboptimal, because they haven't had that investment of time and haven't had the rigor in the process in in executing them and doing the research up front in the right way to find out what kind of, as the four dimensions that we talked about, what kind of users you're trying to serve and what tasks they're doing in what context.
Okay.
And as I've been learning, Tony, if you could also share a little bit about social search and social search as more of an umbrella term.
Yeah, well, so social search isn't really kind of my main area of expertise. It's one of these things where we've articulated a view in the book. Based on our what you might call sort of practitioner experience, as to one way, a way of thinking about different circles of engagement from the user and their immediate team out to the wider community. But it's probably one of these things where I think there are other experts in the academic community, I think, who have probably a more nuanced view on that than I do.
Okay, and Will, as I'd love to give you more of an opportunity to share some of your experiences and how you have seen institutions benefit from considering UX in their search implementations, and and how you've recommended search to be part of really any UX project or website. And you could take us inside an example and how that has evolved and ended up helping a college or university.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Where any sort of search recommendations that we provide or that any consultant should provide should be based around the format of best UX. That forms everything that you should do. You shouldn't be building or designing something based on what the institution wants or desires. It should be a bit more about, is this going to benefit the user? But I think where we've really helped is using search to reduce dead ends and reduce that sometimes sticky navigation. I think there was one institution that comes to mind. It's the University of Arts based in London. They're a fashion design institution, and it's really not really one institution. It's 6 different colleges that make up the overall group. And so we sort of look at the people that are using and accessing the information or looking for a particular degree or program or course, and they don't know which college that associates with, but they'll be hitting the main entry point page. But you need to know we use search as a tool to make sure that all of that information is easily discoverable, no matter where it lies. And that's that includes having a search that captures all the information, like Tony said, but then you also want to be able to refine that information once you know a bit more about their actions and the tasks they want to carry out. So actually, what we ended up implementing is that you have a global search. We also actually allow bespoke search endpoints that focus on a particular user persona. So be that a new student looking for information on courses, and then you can actually generate custom search filters or advanced auto-completion based on that user persona. And then we've also ended up creating sort of 3 or 4 bespoke search endpoints that you can direct those different user groups towards after they first enter the website. And I think actually one of the big successes, they have a scholarships program, this institution, 80 or so different scholarships, all sort of darted around the different piece of information, all in either list views at the moment. And there's lots of different conditions for eligibility, so the year of entry, what college they're currently studying at, for instance. And the uptake on these scholarships was particularly low because it was hard to engage with that content. So what we did is we used the model of search and discoverability to put this to these scholarship pages. So allowing the users to be able to define requirements that are relevant to them and then also make it searchable. And it had a fantastic increase. I think it was a 57% increase in page views from the previous period the year before. And it's using search as a way to really engage users with that information, and using it as a great way to improve that customer experience and shorten that user journey. Because I mean, the end goal for search and for any of these things we've been discussing is to get people to that quality content that you're writing. And when you can sort of implement some of the things that Tony's been talking about, it can be really valuable.
Yeah, when I'm interested to hear more about some of your experiences with colleges and universities, because I think of the higher ed landscape and in some cases the siloed approach within institutions and a decentralized school with colleges and departments and schools, institutes, centers, all these elements that make up a university, and you could be on different planets within an individual university website, and often this very organization-centric approach when we use terminology, whether that's Office of the Registrar or who knows what, that is meaningful internally but may not be as meaningful to the end users. And so in your experiences with schools, are there some common pitfalls or patterns that you have noticed that higher ed in general needs to enhance its game to really serve individuals better?
Well, I think in the past, and institutions aren't going to change. They're going to speak in their language that suits them, and academics are going to write fascinating pieces or research papers based around that concept. But it's really, I think what we're trying to see now, it's going to be the job of the institution's marketing department to use search and other areas to direct their user base to that information, using tools such as synonyms. I know Tony could talk about this at great length, or people searching perhaps acronyms or certain content search in that way. But using search as a tool to mitigate that content, the way it's written like that, to use it as a tool to promote the information that you want them to see. So yeah, not many people search for mathematical science, for instance. They just math. But if you have no content that's doing that, you need to create rule sets and use search to make sure that information is discoverable. Actually, I think one of the that Tony worked on closely was with that when we talk about a federated environment, is University College London. I think Tony was very integral in the actual search design part of that project, which is driven. I think they have millions and 1 or 2 million different records, all in different locations, all completely decentralized, as you mentioned. No one manages. There is no one management of that content. And perhaps Tony can describe how they went about overcoming that challenge of research.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Will. It was a bit like the Wild West, lots and lots of different sites. Most were not managed, actively managed, lots of legacy stuff. And lots of different types of content as well. So part of that piece was doing the content audit and trying to understand the information landscape. And trying to understand which sites we're going to need to be in, i.e. in scope, and also for the design to come up with approaches that we're going to scale if the data was not clean or was noisy. So that really shaped how we went about the faceted search design. What kind of facet values we would expose and what kind of facets we could rely on, and also what the fallback would be if we had data coming into the system which just wasn't populated for the facets that we were trying to expose to the end user. And also thinking about how to expose the different content types to the users, because if you've got a query that can match documents or research papers or video or audio or something else, you could bung all those on a single search results list, but it was felt that they were sufficiently different that users would want to be able to filter them separately by content type. So again, that shaped the way we went about the design, and I'm sure you can see it on ucl.ac.uk now. It allows you to filter by different content type, and it allows you to drill down and find associative links between these different content types. So yeah, that was quite a challenge. A highly federated site and lots and lots of noisy data.
I was going to see if you were going to jump in, Will, there. I wanted to make sure, before I forget, I also touch on or ask you about cross-channel information interaction. And as I think about the website work that our team does for the institution here at Indiana University, and it's whether it's for a campus or a school, and we're not just building responsive websites, we're truly building mobile-first websites, and the data is really powerful about prospective students searching for as part of their college search process and the use of mobile. And so I'm curious to hear more, Tony, in terms of how we think about a more coherent cross-channel experience for users, and how we can design a more coherent cross-channel experience, because that is more and more relevant, obviously.
Yeah, that's right. Well, as you point out, I think a lot of that is can be accommodated by considering and adopting the principles of responsive design. There's a lot that can be done simply by recognizing the different form factors and understanding how best to facilitate a search and discovery experience across these different form factors. But I think the other thing that goes beyond just that responsive design best practice is also thinking about joining the dots, such that if you're halfway through a search session on one device, or you're halfway through saving your list of favorite courses or your list of favorite papers on one device, on the next device you can pick up from where you left off, and that experience is joined up across different devices. And that's particularly true also for e-commerce as well, where we know that shoppers will do their research offline and then go in store and then perhaps do comparisons in store. So it is truly a multi-channel experience. And also, I don't know if you wanted to talk about futuristic things as well, but I think those channels are slightly being blurred these days, because we're going beyond just a simple what form factor is it, smartphone, tablet or desktop, into what is the interaction model anyway. And I think one of the things I think that's going to change the search space is also the rise of chatbots and the application of AI, and I think that's going to change things quite considerably.
Yes, I was absolutely going to ask about that and what you see lying ahead, and even in your own work and research interests, and what you get most excited about and thinking about the future, and in terms of some unexplored areas. Yeah,
well, this is it. I mean, I've been in the search industry for a good couple of decades, and I've seen trends come and go, and they come and go. And so I have a healthy skepticism about these things. And as I mentioned, chatbots and AI are both very hot at the moment. So I often ask myself this question: will they still be hot in 2 years' time? I mean, they'll probably still be hot in a year's time, but 2 years, I don't know. But what I do think is that we are seeing a migration in search from users giving queries and receiving documents to question answering, and more broadly, conversations. So if we just think about question answering first, then yeah, absolutely, there are all sorts of chatbots, and people talk about the app economy being replaced by the chatbot economy, and yeah, there's no doubt that a lot of interactions that are search related could be better facilitated via a conversational style interaction. Not all of them. There's lots of complex tasks that are more analytical, where you'll need a screen, and you always will need a screen. But a lot of these kind of information exchange, information search tasks, can be facilitated, so in some cases better, via a conversational style of UI. But this is where the AI bit comes in, because if we want to deliver a dialogue, a search dialogue, as in the natural language sense, that is truly flexible and robust and smart enough to deal with anything other than beyond just trivial search inquiries, then we're going to need much cleverer back ends and much cleverer algorithms. And that's where the machine learning and AI comes in. And, a lot of progress has been made over the past, particularly the past few years, 2, 3, 4 years. There's been some quite significant advances, and a lot of this is becoming fashionable and mainstream now. And I do think attitudes are changing as well. In the same way as when tablets came out, it raised the bar for our professional applications and search applications that we have in the workplace. We wanted to bring devices to work, and we wanted the same quality of experience to be applied to our professional tools. I think the same thing will happen with things like chatbots, that we'll get used to them as leisure devices, and we'll get used to Alexa in the home and Siri on the phone and all the rest of it, and we'll want to have that same quality of experience and quality of dialogue in the workplace for our professional tools as well. And search is going to be at the heart of that, because it's so conversational in its nature.
I think what we're seeing as well, from not so much in the future but now, is using search as a form to target your conversational bots on a university website. So, for instance, a search user makes a search query on a website, and then you follow what they've clicked on, follow that, and then you can use that to identify, okay, these people, maybe they've searched for this, they've clicked on this, they're probably in the wrong place, and then you can actually use those search analytics to target, pop-ups, say, have you found what you're looking for? Perhaps you need to be looking for, and using that kind of information, that can be quite valuable, especially
I think that's one of the key research questions. Is these things are going to live in an ecosystem. Bots won't replace search, and search won't replace anything else. These things will all work together, and it's back to, I suppose, what you were saying, Rob, about the cross-channel experience. The cross-channels won't be across devices so much, but across interaction elements. Switching between the chatbot and switching between the applications and the search box or the search results page. These things all have to move together. So I think they'll all need to talk to each other in some way. And that is where I think is, where the cross-channel experiences in the future are going to lie.
And Will, as you hear some of those thoughts in terms of an outlook from Tony, are there other implications for higher education in any of those areas beyond the ones that you just touched on?
No, I think we covered everything. I think when you talked about different cross-channel in terms of different devices, search is going to become much more of a primary form of navigation. People are less and less going to be interested in using navigating their way through the links. And as long as I think higher education may be a bit slow, less fast up in the uptake, as maybe an e-commerce environment or other areas. So just making sure that you're thinking about what are my user personas, what are the dead ends, identify those sticking points, and making sure that there is a loop round. I think we're seeing it. It's maybe search is becoming beyond just the actual search results page, using it to recommend relevant content, not just on a course detail page, and using search to provide relevant recommended results, recommended items of content, but also across your whole portfolio. So if someone's looking at a particular area, you can actually use search to display information from relevant blogs or social feeds or is that. So really using it to what we call sort of search-powered content I think that's where it's going to be really interesting the next 2 to 3 years.
Great. And Tony, for those who are intrigued, interested, and want to learn more, where can they follow you? How do they? What resources might you recommend? Obviously, we know about the book, that and any other resources that you might point listeners to.
So from a social media point of view, if I do myself first, I'm on Twitter as Tony GRR, and on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. For resources, I guess it would be events. We run a whole bunch of it. I'm vice chair of the BCS Information Retrieval Specialist Group, and we actually just ran an event in London just 2 days ago. And we've got another event coming up early next year. So have a look at, if you search for BCS Information Retrieval Specialist Group, you'll find a ton of stuff that we do. There's just so much stuff out there. And have a look at my blog. There's a whole section there on other resources as well. Lots of stuff out there.
Great, and I know we're getting to the top of the hour, but I will want to give you the opportunity as well. Any other work that you wanted to highlight or touch on, because I know you're engaged in some really interesting and fascinating work.
Well, I'm not going to go into too much detail today, but please do get in touch with me if you want to hear more about how we've helped some higher education institutions. We've seen that in a fast, effective search it reduce your search exits, improve that the way that users engage with that information, and the you know, the time on your site can increase. If you have a positive experience and you're finding information that you find useful, that is a great way of driving improvement. And we've actually seen it, got some instances where this has improved on, actually increased the level of enrollment. You know, people are making X amount of $1,000 worth of decision, and making sure that people can make an informed and fast decision is paramount towards that.
Excellent. Well, Tony and Will, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been quite enlightening, and in some way, I feel like we just scratched the surface. But really appreciate you sharing, both of you sharing your time and expertise today.
Okay, no problem. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
And as always, thank you to M. Stoner for making Marketing Live possible. Be sure to get reminders about this and other episodes by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can browse the archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. I'm Rob Zinkin. A reminder, we'll have an episode coming up on December the 15th and do a recap of the annual AMA Symposium for the Marketing of Higher Education. So thanks again for tuning into Marketing Live today on the Higher Ed Live Network.